Humorous look at a story that we're going to study today. If you got a Bible, turn to Luke chapter 16. We're going to just kind of walk through this story, and we're going to talk about the truths that this story has for us. So Luke chapter 16, we're going to we'll pick up at verse 19. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores, and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. We have a story of contrast. It's a story of inequity. We have a story of a man that in the skit we called Mr. Rich. It's interesting, he's not even named. But we have this guy who, it says that he dresses in fine purple. He dresses in fine linen. That is a way to say that he dresses very expensively. The color purple was made from the dye that was found in a snail that was found at the Mediterranean Sea in a very small location. It was expensive to get them. It was a long walk to go to be able to get to the place where you could even get those dyes. And so the color purple was a very expensive color to wear. It was often worn only by royalty. So it's saying that when this guy says that he dressed in purple, it says that he dressed expensively. Today we might say that he dressed in Armani suits. You know, he dressed in Men's Warehouse was nowhere near good enough. Men's Warehouse to this guy is where the poor people go to shop. He only wore the best. And then it says that his meals, that he ate sumptuous meals, full of specialty foods. This guy, he didn't go to eat at McDonald's. He went to Ruth Chris Steakhouse. He went to the high dollar places. And when he had meals at home, he didn't use Hamburger Helper. You know, he only used the choicest cuts of meat. He only bought organic vegetables. And on the organic, you know, he would only buy the high-end organic vegetables. He's the kind of guy that would spend more on one meal than most people would spend all week for their food. He celebrated the fact that he was wealthy. Now, is there anything wrong with being wealthy? Is there anything morally wrong with having money? No, there's not. I think we read in Timothy where it says the root of all evil, and I think we usually sometimes forget a word, because we say the root of all evil is money. Go look that up, because that's not what it says. Paul does not tell Timothy that money is the root of all evil. We miss a word there, and it's a very important word. It's the love of money is the root of all evil. Being wealthy, making lots of money is not sinful. It is not inherently evil or immoral. So this guy, Mr. Rich, he is not inherently evil. He's not inherently immoral because he has money. And so the story of inequity and what Jesus is telling here, Jesus is not condemning this guy because he had money. That's what he does with it. But on the other end of the stick, you have Lazarus. Again, isn't it interesting? Of the two people in the story, the only one that has a name is the one that most of us would never know. We would never know the name of the beggar. But Jesus gives a name to the beggar. That name is Lazarus. Lazarus means God helps. I think it's important that he has that name, because I think it gives us a clue to his character. Here's a man who understood where he was. He understood his need for God. And this man Lazarus was laid at the rich man's gate. He's begging for food. He's begging for help. The rich man, Mr. Rich, has to walk by him day in and day out to see him and to walk and probably even to step over him. He longs for scraps from the rich man's table. You know, it's not that he's willing to eat something that fell on the ground and use the 5-second rule and, you pick it up before 5 seconds. It's not that. It's not like he's sitting at the table and some food falls on the ground and he reaches down and grabs it and eats it. It says that he is longing for the food, the scraps that the dogs are eating. He wishes that he could get in there before the dogs and get the scraps that have been laying on the ground maybe for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. He wants to grab that food that the dogs are eating up. Desires that. He longs for it. And then it also says that the dogs licked his sores. Isn't that terrible to hear? Well, one of the commentaries I read said something that struck me. That for Lazarus, the dogs coming and licking his sores might have been the best part of his day. Think about that. The best part of his day were dogs licking his sores. Because somehow it brought some kind of relief. It brought relief to his life. And it was personal contact. Here is a man that society has forgotten. Verse 22. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. Continue that story of two contrasts, two people. Lazarus dies, and Jesus says that the angels came and carried him to Abraham's side. That is a way of saying that the angels took him and took him to heaven. He got his reward. The rich man also died and was buried. It gives us the idea that Lazarus probably did not even have a burial. That Lazarus probably, there was no funeral for him. There wasn't a grand procession out to the burial plot. If the body was left and the body was even found, somebody came, they grabbed the body, they went to the pauper's grave, which would be basically an open pit, and they threw the body in and threw some dirt over it. There was no rabbi giving a great speech about how wonderful Lazarus was. There were no professional mourners mourning and weeping and wailing. There was no obituary celebrating his life in the newspaper. He died and he got his reward. Was taken to heaven. The rich man also died and was buried. Let's think about what his funeral was like. His funeral was probably gorgeous. There were probably tons of flowers. There was probably a casket that was one of the most expensive caskets that could be found. They probably had hired professional mourners who were there at the funeral. They were there at the house before, and they just carried on, and it was part of the Jewish cultural tradition that they were wailing and weeping and making an obnoxious racket. So that everybody that went around would know that Mr. Rich died, and everybody is so upset about this. And then at the funeral itself, the rabbi got up, and the rabbi probably preached a beautiful memorial to him. Probably talked about how great a guy Mr. Rich was, because Mr. Rich was probably a really good Jew. Mr. Rich was probably one that every Saturday he was in the synagogue. He was probably the kind, he probably taught synagogue school at some point. And he was the kind of guy that people in the synagogue looked up to. He would have been respected because he had money. He had power. And Jesus says that at his death, that Mr. Rich received his last good thing. The last good thing in his life was a fancy memorial service. And that was it. It was it because Mr. Rich got his reward. Mr. Rich got what he deserved. Let's read verse 23. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. In Hades. That word Hades, it is typically throughout the Old Testament, the word Hades is just used as the term for the place of the dead. Without any kind of indication of mourning or torment or punishment or anything like that. Hades is typically used throughout the Old Testament just to refer to the place where those that had died had gone. But here, it's obvious that it has a different meaning. Here, it is a synonym for the word Gehenna. Gehenna is a Greek translation, a Greek kind of transliteration of what is called the Valley of Hinnom. The Valley of Hinnom was set just outside the gates of Jerusalem. And the Valley of Hinnom was the garbage dump for the city of Jerusalem. The people would take their garbage, they would take it out to the Valley of Hinnom, and they would dump it there. Now, if you were like me, you can remember back many, many years ago, I don't think we do this anymore, but remember back many decades ago, we used to burn trash in the dump. I remember that. I remember sometimes the dump, they would light the dump on fire, and oh, man, what a stench. Well, if you can imagine a fire burning continually. Hell, throughout the New Testament, is called Gehenna, referring to the Valley of Hinnom, where there was always a fire, where there was always a stench, where it was the worst that you could imagine. And that is where Mr. Rich has gone. But why? Why did Mr. Rich go there, and why did Lazarus go to heaven? Is it because of the actions in their life? Did their actions, the things that they did, put them there? In a sense, yes. But only because their actions demonstrated what was really in their heart. You see, throughout his life, Mr. Rich lived his life saying to God, I don't care about you. You are not important in my life. I don't need you. And I don't want you. And at his death, in God's kindness, God looked down to Mr. Rich and said, you don't want me. You don't care about me. You don't need me. And so I'm going to give you what you want. And I am going to completely remove myself from your experience. Folks, that is hell. Every good thing in life comes from God. Every good thing about life comes from God. If you like when you wake up in the morning and you walk outside and you see the sun shining and you see the green grass, you feel the warmth of the sun, if that makes you excited, remember all of that comes from God. The light to be able to see, it comes from God. Mr. Rich lived his life saying, God, I do not want you. God, I do not need you. And in death, God said, okay, I am not going to force you to worship me. I am not going to force you to submit to me. If you do not want to, you can live your life for eternity without any of the good that is offered. Mr. Rich had gotten all of his good things before he died. And now God has said, you reject me, I'm going to let you. Remember this. God did not send this man to hell. Let me say that again. God did not send him to hell. He sent himself. You and I have to make the same choice. We have to make the choice of where our eternal destiny is going to be. God does not send anyone to hell. We make the choice and send ourselves. God does not force anybody to have heaven. He does not force anybody to accept Him. God simply gives us the opportunity. He shows us and He tries to draw us. Everything in life good that is happening, it is God trying to draw us to Himself. Sometimes when we experience heartache and hardship, even then, sometimes it is God trying to draw us to Himself. He is trying to pull us, to make us come to a point where we will understand that we need Him. Mr. Rich, throughout his life, just thumbed his nose at God and said, I don't want you and I don't need you. And when he died, God said, okay, here you go. I'm not going to force you. Lazarus, on the other hand, lived his life with a desire, a hunger for God. Lazarus' actions demonstrate what was in his life. His actions demonstrate that he recognized that he could not provide for himself, that he recognized that he needed God in his life. And throughout his life, Lazarus must have cried out to God, God, help me. God, help me. And when Lazarus' end came, God reached down and said, you asked for my help. You submitted yourself to me. You recognized that you needed me. You wanted me in your life. And so now for eternity, you're going to have me. You and I have got to make a choice. How will we live our life? What are we going to believe? And when we read this story, sometimes we can very easily make the mistake to say that this is teaching what we call a works theology. We can read these passages, we read this story, and we can say, oh, wait a second, this means that Mr. Rich, because he lived his life, because of all the things that he did wrong, that's why he went to hell. No, he didn't. He went to hell because he rejected God. Lazarus went to heaven not because of all the things that he did, but Lazarus got to heaven because he recognized his need for God. He recognized that he was a sinner and that he had a need for God. In the book of James, James says to somebody, he says, you say you have faith without works. You say you have faith without any actions to back it up. James says to that person, that's great. You show me your faith without works, and I will show you my faith by my works. Now, is James saying that he's saved because of the things he does? No. He's saying that I can prove the reality of my faith by the way that I live my life. For all of us, we need to understand our works, our actions, they do not save us, but they prove the reality of what is in us. If I live my life not caring about others, if I live my life like Mr. Rich did, thumbing my nose at God, I am saying throughout my life, even if my words say something different, I am saying that God, I don't care about you, I don't want you, and I don't need you. But if throughout my life I am demonstrating compassion for the helpless, and if I am living my life in a way that says, I recognize that there is a power greater than myself, then our actions are saying, no matter what our words say, our actions are proving that we recognize that there is a power greater than us, that we recognize that we have a need for God. And it is that need for God that leads us to Jesus Christ. rich man never came to a point where he submitted himself to God, where he said, God, I am a sinner. Forgive me. His life demonstrates that. Lazarus, throughout his life, demonstrated that he recognized that he needed God. You and I are the same. We have to make the same choice. Are we going to come to a place in our life where we say, God, I need you? Or are we going to live our life saying, I don't need you, I don't want you? Because in the end, God is going to give us what we want. And if you do not want God in your life, there's going to come a day that He is going to say, okay, you don't want me, I won't be there. Hell is the absence of God. Hell is not a party place. I love this skit. I love this picture of having to do a crossword puzzle over and over. Now, I kind of like a crossword puzzle. Give me one a year. But give me the same one for eternity? It does not sound like much fun. Hell is not a place of parties. It is a place of torment. Why is it a place of torment? Is it because God is sadistic and wants to punish? No. Because anything good comes from God. And hell is the one place that God has said, I will not be there. Personally, I don't want to be anywhere that God is not. And I want to ask you, have you ever come to a place in your life that even though your actions, your words, even though your words might say, yes, I'm a follower of Jesus, do your actions say that that's a lie? And if your actions say that your words are a lie, then your words are truly a lie. We're not saved by our actions, but our actions prove what's really in our heart. And in just a minute, we're going to sing. And there may be some of you here today that recognize that you've said the right things, but you take stock of your life and you go, yeah, no, my life kind of proves that I worry and care more about me than anybody else. That my actions prove that God is not important in my life. Then I'm going to ask you to come and pray with me and let's get you on the right track. Some of you may say, I have never come to that place where I even recognize that I really needed God. I haven't forcefully said to God, I don't want you, but I just recognize that my life has just kind of said, God, I really don't need you. I've never really thought about Him. But you recognize today that, yes, you do need God. Then come as we sing and let's start you down that path to say yes to God. Let's pray together. Our Father in heaven, Lord, we need you. We might not always admit it, and sometimes our actions and our lives don't demonstrate that we need you. But Father, we need you. We need your love. We need your mercy. And so, Father, I pray today that you would empower us, that you would guide us. Father, I pray today that you would lead us to you. Father, bring us to that point where we recognize our need for you. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. Let's stand and sing and come as God leads.